I'll make you forget every man before me." The words dropped like a stone into still water. 30 people around that Nashville boardroom table stopped breathing. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows suddenly felt cold, sharp, unforgiving. And Zora Caldwell, brilliant, composed, untouchable Zora, felt every pair of eyes in that room land on her like she'd committed the crime, like she was the one who'd just shattered the illusion of professionalism they all pretended to live by. But she wasn't the one who'd said it. Miles Caldwell was. Her husband, their CEO, the man at the head of the Fortune 500 empire they'd built together. And he'd just turned their private pain into a public spectacle. But here's what you need to understand about that moment. Because this isn't just a story about a marriage falling apart in front of colleagues who pretend not to notice. This is about power, real power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that walks out of rooms quietly while everyone else is still scrambling to figure out what just happened. And Zora, she was about to teach everyone in that room, including Miles, what power actually looked like. Let me take you back, just a few hours earlier, before the board meeting, before the declaration, before everything changed. It was morning in their home, on the edge of Nashville's wealthiest district, the kind of house that whispered money instead of shouting it. Marble countertops, custom cabinetry, windows that framed the Tennessee hills like expensive paintings. Zora stood in the kitchen, sunlight catching the edge of her coffee cup, and she asked him the question she'd been holding for months. "I need you to sign the papers, Miles." Her voice was calm, measured, the way you'd discuss quarterly projections or dinner reservations. "And I'd like one last night, to say goodbye properly." Miles looked up from his tablet. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Fear? But then it was gone, replaced by that CEO mask he wore so well. He nodded, said they'd talk about it later, and Zora let it go, because she thought this was going to be easy. She thought they'd handle this like adults. She thought wrong. Fast forward to the boardroom. Harmon Tech's quarterly review, the kind of meeting where millions of dollars hang on bullet points and profit margins. Zora sat at the far end of the table, her usual spot, the one she'd earned through late nights, and brilliant strategies that saved the company more times than anyone wanted to admit. The assistant CEO was mid-presentation, droning on about third-quarter earnings when Miles stood up. And that's when he said it. "I'll make you forget every man before me." Just like that. In front of the VP of Operations, the Chief Financial Officer, the board members who controlled their stock options, in front of everyone who mattered. The room didn't just go quiet, it held its breath. Someone's pen stopped mid-stroke. A laptop screen dimmed into sleep mode. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Zora closed her eyes. Just for a second. Long enough to hear her grandmother's voice echo from childhood Sunday dinners and front porch wisdom. "Child, no man can tell you who you are." That voice had carried her through law school when professors doubted her, through boardrooms where she was the only woman, through every moment someone tried to make her smaller than she was, and it would carry her through this too. She opened her eyes, met Miles's gaze across that polished table, and she said, with a voice that could have been discussing the weather, "Okay. If you meant that, you could have said it any time. I asked you for one final night together, and all I wanted was a quiet conversation." The words landed like surgical strikes. Precise, clean, devastating. The room exhaled. Throats cleared. Papers shuffled. The assistant CEO clicked to the next slide with trembling hands, and everyone pretended. They hadn't just witnessed a marriage implode during a profit analysis, but they had, and more importantly, they'd seen Zora refuse to break. The meeting ended. People filed out quickly. Too quickly. The kind of exit that screams, "I don't want to be involved." And as Zora gathered her materials, she heard them. The whispers. "Is it true they're divorcing? Did you hear what he said? God, how awkward." She walked past them all. Head high, spine straight, gave small, polite nods when necessary, offered no explanations, no justifications, No tears. Because here's what Miles didn't understand when he made that declaration. Here's what he forgot in his desperation to control the narrative. Zora didn't need his permission to leave. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need anything from him except his signature on those papers. And now? Now everyone knew it too. By the time she reached her car in the executive parking garage, her phone was buzzing. Priya, her oldest friend. The one who'd known her since before the money, before the title, before Miles. Z, I heard what happened. Meet me at Mama Lou's, now. And Zora knew, she just knew, that tonight was going to be longer than she'd planned. Because that declaration, that public claim of ownership disguised as devotion, that changed everything. The question is, when someone tries to own you in front of the world, do you fight back loud, or do you walk away quiet? And which one takes more courage? Mama Lou's Soul Food Kitchen sat on Nashville's east side like a secret only locals knew. The kind of place where the sweet tea was always cold, the cornbread always warm, and nobody asked questions they didn't want answered. Zora pushed through the door just as the evening sun started painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. And there, in the corner booth by the window, sat Priya, waiting, always waiting, always knowing when Zora needed her most. But before we get to that conversation, before we dive into what happened when two best friends dissected a marriage in the fading Tennessee light, you need to understand something about Priya Merchant. She wasn't just Zora's friend, she was her mirror, the one who reflected back the truth when everyone else was busy telling comfortable lies. They'd met 15 years ago at Vanderbilt Law School, two women of color in a sea, of old money and older traditions, and they'd survived by refusing to play small. So when Priya heard what Miles had done in that boardroom, she didn't just text, she didn't just call, she summoned, because some betrayals require sweet tea and witnesses. Zora slid into the booth. Didn't say hello, didn't need to. Priya pushed a glass of sweet tea across the table like it was medicine, which, in the South, it basically was. Z, Priya said softly, and the way she said that one letter, that single syllable, carried 15 years of friendship and 1,000 unspoken conversations. I heard what happened. That's outrageous. And just like that, the damn Zora had been holding back since that boardroom started to crack. Not break, not yet, but crack. He told everyone he'd make me forget every other man, Zora said, her voice steady but her hands wrapped tight around that glass. Like I'm some trophy he gets to polish and put back on the shelf. Priya shook her head slowly, the kind of slow that says I'm not surprised, just disappointed. Zora, no one owns you, money or not, power or not. That man doesn't get to decide who you are. You asked for a divorce. You have every right to it, every single right. And here's where the story gets interesting. Because Zora didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't do any of the things people expect when a marriage dies in public. Instead, she clenched that glass tighter and said, I just wanted one calm goodbye, just one night to end things with dignity. He turned it into a performance. The words hung there, heavy, and Priya leaned forward, folded her hands on that worn wooden table, and said something that would echo through everything that came next. Listen to me. Maybe he was scared, maybe he panicked, but power means nothing, absolutely nothing, if you still walk out that door on your own terms. You know who you are. You come from generations of women who chose dignity over desperation. Your grandmother, your aunt, your mother, they all knew when to stand tall and when to walk away. I'm proud of you. The words hit Zora like gospel, like Sunday morning prayers in her aunt's church, like her grandmother's hand on her shoulder saying, child, you were born knowing your worth. And suddenly, Zora wasn't just sitting in a soul food restaurant feeling sorry for herself. She was remembering Sunday mornings when her aunt would pray before the congregation, voice steady and sure, may you always stand tall in who God made you to be. Remembering her grandmother on the front porch, shelling peas and dropping wisdom like seeds. Baby girl, any man who's afraid of your strength doesn't deserve your softness. Those women hadn't just survived, they'd thrived. In a world that tried to make them small, they'd chosen to be enormous. And Zora? She was their legacy, their proof, their victory. She opened her eyes, forced a smile. It was small, but it was real. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed that." But as she drove away from Mama Lou's 20 minutes later, hands gripping the steering wheel, questions spun through her mind like a tornado. If someone said those things to you, claimed you in front of everyone you work with, what would you do? Would you fight? Would you leave? And here's the question that kept circling back, the one that wouldn't. To let her rest. At what point does protection become possession? At what point does love become a cage? Now, while Zora was finding her strength in a corner booth on the east side, Miles Caldwell was falling apart on the other side of town. His country club estate sprawled across 15 acres of manicured lawn and old money tradition. The kind of place where the magnolias were always blooming and the bourbon was always top shelf. He stood on his back patio, tie loosened, jacket discarded, phone pressed to his ear. And on the other end, Claire Reynolds, board member, old family friend, the woman who'd known him since before the money, before the power, before he forgot how to be human. "Claire," he said, and his voice cracked just slightly, just enough to reveal the fear underneath. "I think I ruined everything." There was a pause. Somewhere in the distance, a bullfrog croaked. The Tennessee dusk settled over everything like a blanket. "I heard," Claire said finally. "You really said that, in front of the entire board." Miles poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon. His hand shook. Just a tremor, but it was there. "I don't know what came over me. She asked for the divorce this morning. So calm, so matter-of-fact, like we were discussing a business merger. And I wanted her to know how much I wanted her to stay, how much I've always wanted her. But the words came out wrong, all wrong. And here's what you need to understand about Miles Caldwell, because it would be easy to make him the villain. The controlling CEO who claimed his wife in public like property. But people are never that simple, never that clean. Miles hadn't always been this man. There was a time, 15 years ago, when they first met at a charity gala, when he'd been different, softer. He'd approached Zora with a nervous smile and a terrible pickup line about quarterly earnings. And she'd laughed, actually laughed. Not the polite laugh you give executives, the real one, the kind that reaches your eyes. They'd danced until midnight, talked until dawn, built something that felt unbreakable. But somewhere between then and now, between the IPO and the Forbes list, and the corner office, Miles had started confusing love with ownership, started thinking that providing meant possessing. And today he'd revealed that confusion to everyone who mattered. "Listen, Miles," Claire said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many marriages collapse under the pressure of success. "Pride's a nasty thing. Are you sure she meant what she said about the divorce, or did she need you to prove something? If you care about her at all, if there's any part of you that still sees her as a partner and not a possession, now's the time to be honest. No more games, no more performances." Miles sat down heavily on the patio chair. It creaked under his weight. "I was planning to sign the papers next week," he admitted. "The board insisted we keep this quiet until after the merger. Stock prices, investor confidence, all that. But after what I said today, Claire, I scared her. I saw it in her eyes. And now I'm thinking, what if I fight? What if instead of letting her go, I actually show her why she should stay?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Claire finally spoke, her words were careful, measured. It might not be too late. The fact that she asked for one final night means she's still willing to talk to you, still willing to give you a chance to be honest. But Miles, if you go into that conversation trying to win, trying to convince, trying to control, you'll lose her forever. Let her hear your truth, not your strategy, your truth. Miles looked out at the golf course rolling into darkness. Perfectly maintained grass, carefully trimmed hedges, everything in its place, everything controlled. And he realized, sitting there with bourbon in his hand and regret in his throat, that his entire life had become about control, controlling outcomes, controlling narratives, controlling people. And the one person who'd never needed his control, who'd built her own empire right alongside his, was walking away. The question was, would he let her? The next morning came too fast. Harmon Tech's headquarters gleamed in the early sun, all glass and steel, and the illusion of transparency. But inside those walls, whispers traveled faster than emails. The divorce rumors had reached HR by 9 a.m. By 9:30, Zora was sitting across from Rachel Morrison, the HR director, in a small conference room that smelled like coffee and carefully worded liability. Rachel had kind eyes, the kind that had seen too many workplace dramas and learned to navigate them with compassion and corporate policy in equal measure. "Miss Caldwell," she began, and the formality of it stung. They'd been on a first-name basis for 5 years, but divorce changed things, changed everything. "We're worried about how this situation might affect your work. The company. Would you like to step back from any major projects until everything settles?" And there it was, the question underneath the question, the one that asked, are you going to be a problem? Are you going to be a distraction? Are you going to make this difficult for us? Zora met Rachel's gaze without flinching. "Rachel, the only thing changing is my last name. My work will speak for itself. If anything, I'll throw myself into it even harder." She paused. "Let that sink in. Unless you're asking me to step back, in which case I'd like that in writing." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Rachel's kind eyes got a little harder, a little more calculating. No. Nothing like that. We just want to make sure you're supported, that you have the resources you need. Translation: we want to make sure you're not going to sue us or tank the stock price or make this messier than it already is." Zora stood, smoothed her skirt, offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine. More than fine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the development team in 10 minutes. She walked out of that office with her head high and her heart pounding. Because here's what Rachel didn't understand. What none of them understood. Stepping back wasn't an option. Showing weakness wasn't an option. The moment Zora gave them permission to see her as broken, as distracted, as less than, they'd use it. They'd sideline her, reassign her projects, ease her out with sympathetic smiles and generous severance packages. And she'd spent too many years building her reputation to let Miles's public meltdown destroy it. But walking back to her office, past cubicles where people pretended not to stare, past conference rooms where conversations died when she appeared, Zora felt the weight of it. The performance, the constant vigilance, the exhausting work of being strong when all she wanted was to scream. By lunchtime, she was hiding in her office with the door closed, staring at the city skyline and wondering how everything had gotten so complicated. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity, or maybe hope, made her look. It was from Claire Reynolds. "Zora, I know this isn't my place, but Miles is struggling. He wants to talk tonight. Really talk. Give him a chance to be honest. You might be surprised." Zora stared at that message for 5 full minutes. Her first instinct was to delete it. Her second was to respond with something cutting and final. But her third instinct, the one she listened to, was to wait, to think, because Claire wasn't wrong. Tonight was supposed to be their final night together, the goodbye they'd agreed on in the kitchen that morning before everything exploded. And maybe, just maybe, there was something worth hearing. Or maybe she just wanted closure. Real closure. The kind that came from understanding, not running. The rest of the day crawled by with the speed of continental drift. Every meeting felt longer. Every email felt heavier. By 5 p.m., when Zora finally packed up her things and headed for the parking garage, she was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of tired that settles in your bones and makes you wonder if anything is worth this much effort. She drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of tires on pavement, and her own thoughts spinning in circles. When she pulled into the driveway of the house she'd shared with Miles for 7 years, her stomach twisted. The lights were on. He was home, waiting. She sat in the car for a moment, gathering herself. Armor on, guard up, because whatever happened tonight would determine everything that came next. Would it be a clean break, or would it be messy? Would they find some kind of peace, or would it end in the kind of bitterness that poisoned everything it touched? Zora took a deep breath, opened the car door. The evening air smelled like jasmine and possibility, and as she walked up the path to that front door, she made herself a promise she would listen. She would give him this one chance to be real. But if he used it to manipulate, to control, to make her feel small, she was done. Completely done. No second chances, no do-overs, just done. She opened the door. The house was dim, soft. Someone, Miles, obviously, had lit candles in the living room. Expensive ones that smelled like vanilla and sandalwood. A jazz record played from the vintage turntable in the corner. Miles Davis, their song from the night they met. And there, sitting on the couch with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, was Miles. He looked up when she entered, and Zora saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability, real, unguarded, terrifying vulnerability. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying, or screaming, or both. "I wasn't sure you would." Zora set her bag down by the door, slipped off her heels. The hardwood floor was cool under her feet. "I said I'd give you one night," she replied. "I keep my word." They sat on opposite ends of the couch. The space between them felt like an ocean, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Just Miles Davis on the turntable, and the candles flickering, and the weight of 7 years pressing down on both of them. Finally, Zora broke the silence. "You asked why I'm leaving," she said softly. "But first, I need to know something." "Why did you say that? In front of everyone?" Miles closed his eyes, rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked at her again, he seemed older, tired. "I wanted you to know how I felt. I thought, God, this sounds so stupid now. I thought if I said it privately, you'd just brush it off. But if I said it in front of everyone, you'd have to take it seriously. You'd have to believe me." He laughed, bitter, broken. "Instead, I just made everything worse. I sounded arrogant, possessive, like some caveman claiming his territory. I'm sorry, Zora. I'm so sorry." And here's where it got complicated, because Zora had expected excuses, justifications. The corporate speak Miles was so good at, but this raw honesty? She hadn't prepared for this. "It hurt," she said quietly. "It felt like you were telling the entire company that I belonged to you, that I was something you owned." Miles nodded, swallowed hard. "That's not what I meant. I swear that's not what I meant. I've always hoped you'd stay, no matter what happened, no matter how much I screwed up. And I've screwed up a lot, haven't I?" The question hung there. Zora could have let it go, could have offered some polite reassurance. But they were past politeness now, past the careful dance of corporate marriage. "Yes," she said simply. "You have. You let the company become more important than us. You let board meetings replace dinner conversations. You let your phone interrupt every moment. We tried to share, and somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your partner and started seeing me as, I don't know, another asset to manage." Miles stood abruptly, walked to the mantel above the fireplace. There was a small wooden box there. Zora had never noticed it before. He opened it carefully, like it contained something precious or dangerous. When he turned around, he was holding a framed photograph, 5 years old, faded slightly at the edges. It was them, at the company gala, the one where they'd announced their engagement. They looked younger, happier, unburdened by the weight of success. "I found this today," Miles said, walking slowly back to the couch. He handed her the frame. "We were so happy. Look at us. We couldn't stop smiling." Zora studied the photo. She remembered that night. The champagne, the dancing, the way Miles had pulled her close on the terrace and whispered, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you this happy." And she'd believed him. God, she'd believed him. "I miss that us," she whispered. Miles sat down. Closer this time. Not touching, but closer. "I do too. I was an idiot to let work take over everything, to let the company become more important than the person who helped me build it. I should have protected us more. Protected you more." The words were right. The tone was right. But Zora had learned long ago that words were easy. Actions were what mattered. "So why didn't you?" she asked. Not accusatory, just curious, genuinely curious. Miles was quiet for a long time. The jazz record changed tracks. Outside, a car drove past, life continuing while theirs hung in balance. "Pride," he finally said. "Fear. The belief that if I just worked hard enough, made enough money, built a big enough empire, then everything else would fall into place. That you'd be happy, because we were successful. But success doesn't keep you warm at night, does it? It doesn't hold you when you're scared. It doesn't show up when you need it most." Zora felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "Maybe." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." She set the photograph down on the coffee table, looked at Miles, really looked at him, for the first time in months, and she saw it, the exhaustion, the regret, the man underneath the CEO mask. "I never doubted you loved me," she said quietly. "I just needed you to let me make one final choice, to respect that choice, to not turn it into a power play or a public declaration or whatever that was in the boardroom." Miles reached out, slowly, carefully, like she was something fragile that might break under too much pressure. He took her hand, kissed the top of it. Not passionate, not possessive, just tender. "Whatever you choose," he said, voice thick with emotion, "I will respect it. I promise. No more games, no more performances, just truth." And Zora wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But belief required more than words. It required proof, time, consistency, things they didn't have, things they'd run out of years ago. She pulled her hand back gently. "I need to think," she said. It's a lot." Miles nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, or not. Whatever you decide." They sat there for another hour, talking, really talking. Not about business or stocks or board meetings. About them. About what went wrong. About the moments they'd missed and the opportunities they'd wasted. And slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, the ocean between them shrank. Not disappeared, but shrank. By midnight, Zora was exhausted, emotionally wrung out like a dish rag. She stood to leave. Miles stood too. "Stay," he said. Not a command. A question. "Just tonight. We can talk more in the morning. Or not. But stay." And Zora, against every instinct screaming at her to leave, to protect herself, to maintain boundaries, found herself nodding. "Okay, but I'm taking the guest room." Miles smiled. Sad, but genuine. "Okay." She went upstairs. The guest room was exactly as she remembered. Neutral colors, comfortable bed, everything designed for visitors who never stayed long. She lay down fully clothed on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling. Downstairs, she could hear Miles moving around, blowing out candles, turning off the record player, going through the motions of ending a day that had changed everything. And Zora wondered, was tonight a beginning or an ending? Was it possible to go back? Should they even try? Or was some damage just too deep to repair? The questions chased each other through her mind like dogs chasing their tails. Round and round. No answers. Just more questions. And as she finally drifted off to sleep in that guest room bed, one question rose above all the others. When someone shows you who they really are, vulnerability and all, do you believe them? And if you do, what then? Because vulnerability doesn't erase history. It doesn't undo hurt. It just reveals the human underneath. And sometimes, that's the scariest thing of all. Because hating someone who's cruel is easy, but letting go of someone who's just flawed, someone who's trying but failing, someone who loves you but doesn't know how to show it, that's the hardest thing in the world. And as the Nashville night settled over that house, over Miles downstairs and Zora upstairs and the space between them that held 7 years of history, one thing was clear: tomorrow would bring decisions. Real decisions, not about love or marriage or public declarations, but about dignity, about worth, about what happens when pride and love collide and someone has to choose which matters more. So, here's the question that will keep you up tonight, the same one keeping Zora awake in that guest room. When someone tries to change at the last possible moment, do they deserve a second chance? Or is timing everything, and sometimes the only answer is too little, too late? Morning came quietly, not with drama or fanfare, or the kind of cinematic sunrise that promises new beginnings, just soft light creeping through the guest room curtains and the distant sound of birds arguing over territory in the magnolia trees outside. Zora opened her eyes, and for one disorienting moment couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The boardroom, the declaration, the long night of conversation that had peeled back layers she'd thought were permanent. She sat up slowly, ran her hands through her hair, and wondered what the hell she was supposed to do next. Because here's the thing about clarity, it doesn't always arrive in a flash of lightning. Sometimes it comes in the quiet moments, the in-between spaces. And as Zora sat on the edge of that guest room bed, feet on the cool hardwood floor, she realized something profound. She already knew what she needed to do. She'd known all along. The question wasn't about whether to stay or go. It was about how to do it with dignity intact. She could hear Miles downstairs, coffee maker gurgling, cabinets opening and closing, the familiar rhythm of a man trying to act normal when everything was falling apart. And that sound, that domestic symphony she'd woken to for 7 years, made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. Because endings are never clean, even when they're necessary, even when they're right. Zora stood, splashed water on her face in the guest bathroom, looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, older than 38, but also stronger, like she'd survived something most people never even attempt. She thought about her grandmother again, that woman who'd buried 2 husbands and raised 6 children and still found reasons to laugh every single day. What would she say if she could see Zora now? Probably something like, "Baby, love ain't always enough. Sometimes you gotta love yourself more." She went downstairs. Miles was in the kitchen, 2 coffee cups on the counter. He'd made hers exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, dash of cinnamon. Such a small thing. Such an enormous thing. He looked up when she entered. "Morning," he said quietly. No assumptions, no expectations, just acknowledgement. "Morning," she replied. Took the coffee. The warmth seeped into her hands, and she realized she'd been cold all night. Not temperature cold, soul cold. The kind that settles in when you're making impossible decisions. They stood there in that kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows, and the silence between them was different from last night. Not tense, not angry, just sad. The kind of sad that comes from knowing something beautiful is ending and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But here's what you're probably wondering. After that conversation, after Miles showed vulnerability, after he promised to respect her choice, did Zora change her mind? Did she decide to stay, give him another chance, let love win? And the answer is not exactly, because the truth is more complicated than that, more nuanced, more real. "Miles," Zora said finally, setting her coffee cup down on the granite counter. "Last night meant something. It really did. You being honest, showing me who you are underneath the CEO. That's the man I fell in love with. That's the man I married." She paused. This next part was going to hurt. For both of them. But one vulnerable conversation doesn't erase years of feeling invisible, of being treated like a business asset instead of a wife. And I need you to understand something. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because I started loving myself more. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples spreading outward. Miles gripped his own coffee cup tighter. I know, he said, and his voice cracked just slightly. I know. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I wish I'd figured this out sooner. Before it was too late. Zora felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Me too, she whispered. But we can't live in the past. We can only decide what happens next. Miles nodded slowly, set his cup down, walked to the study just off the kitchen. When he came back, he was holding an envelope. The envelope. The one containing the divorce papers she'd asked him to sign yesterday morning. A lifetime ago, it seemed now. I signed them, he said quietly, last night, after you went upstairs. Not because I wanted to, but because you asked. And for once in my life, I wanted to put what you needed ahead of what I wanted. Zora took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it. There, on every required line, was his signature, Miles Alexander Caldwell. Strong, decisive, final. She looked up at him. Thank you, she said. And she meant it. Not thank you for ending our marriage. Thank you for respecting me enough to let me go. But the story doesn't end there. Because life isn't that simple. Zora still had to face the office, the board, the whispers and speculation. And Miles, he had decisions to make too. Big ones. The kind that would define not just his marriage, but his entire career. By 10 a.m., Zora was back at her own apartment. The one she'd kept even after marrying Miles. The one everyone thought was just an investment property, but was really her escape plan. She showered, changed into fresh clothes, put on the armor of professionalism she'd perfected over 15 years in corporate America. And then she called her lawyer. It's done, she said. He signed. Let's file today. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, who'd handled more divorces than she cared to count, didn't ask questions. I'll have it filed by end of business, she said. You doing okay? Zora thought about that. Was she okay? I will be, she said. And for the first time in months, she believed it. Meanwhile, across town in Harmon Tech's executive suite, Miles was having a very different morning. He sat in his corner office, the Nashville skyline stretched out before him like a promise or a threat, and stared at his phone. He'd made a decision last night. A big one. Now he just had to follow through. He dialed Claire Reynolds' number. She answered on the second ring. Miles. How did it go? He leaned back in his leather chair. I signed the papers. We're done. Or we will be once they're filed. There was a pause. And how do you feel about that? Claire asked gently. Miles considered lying, saying he was fine, that it was for the best. All the platitudes people use when their world is falling apart. But he'd promised himself, promised Zora, that he was done with performances. Like I failed, he admitted. Like I had something incredible and I let it slip through my fingers because I was too busy proving I was important to remember what actually mattered. Claire's voice was soft but firm. That's called growth, Miles. Painful, expensive growth, but growth nonetheless. So what are you going to do about it? And that was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when you've lost everything but learned everything? When the price of wisdom is the thing you treasured most? Miles took a deep breath. I'm calling an emergency board meeting, he said. Today, I'm stepping down as CEO. The silence on Claire's end was deafening. You're what? You heard me. I'm stepping down. Not because the board wants me to, not because of the divorce, but because I need to. I've spent 15 years building this company and I've lost myself in the process. I need to figure out who Miles Caldwell is when he's not standing in front of a boardroom. And I can't do that while running a Fortune 500. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's incredibly brave, Miles. Stupid maybe, but brave. He laughed. Actually laughed. Yeah, well, I'm trying to be less of one and more of the other. They talked logistics, succession planning, how to spin this to the press. all the corporate machinery that had to be set in motion when a CEO decides to walk away from an empire. And through it all, Miles felt something he hadn't felt in years: relief. Like he'd been holding his breath for a decade and finally remembered how to exhale. By noon, word had spread through Harmon Tech like wildfire. The CEO was calling an emergency board meeting. Speculation ran rampant. Was the company being sold? Was there a scandal? Had the divorce triggered some kind of breakdown? Zora heard about it from 3 different people before she even made it to her desk. And sitting there, staring at her computer screen without really seeing it, she wondered, what was Miles doing? The board meeting started at 2 p.m. Zora wasn't invited. She wasn't on the board, despite her contributions to the company, but Priya was. And at 2:15, her phone buzzed with a text. Z. You're not going to believe this. Miles just resigned, effective immediately. He's recommending the COO takeover. He's walking away from everything. Zora read the message 3 times, felt something twist in her chest. Pride? Sadness? Vindication? All of it, and none of it. Miles had let go, not just of her, of the thing he'd built his entire identity around, and she didn't know whether to applaud or cry. By 3 p.m., the announcement went company-wide. Miles Caldwell, CEO and founder, was stepping down for personal reasons. He would remain on the board in an advisory capacity, but would no longer be involved in day-to-day operations. The COO, a competent woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been with the company for 8 years, would take the helm. And just like that, an era ended. Zora sat in her office, door closed, and processed it all. Part of her wanted to call him, to ask what he was thinking, if he was okay. But another part, the part that had spent last night and this morning choosing herself, knew that wasn't her job anymore. Miles's journey was his own now, just like hers was hers. And maybe that was the whole point. Maybe love wasn't about holding on. Maybe it was about knowing when to let go so both people could breathe. The rest of the week passed in a blur. The divorce papers were filed. The media got wind of the story. CEO steps down amid high-profile divorce, and ran with it for exactly 2 news cycles before moving on to the next scandal. Zora threw herself into work, led her team through a critical product launch, proved to everyone, including herself, that she was more than just Miles Caldwell's wife. She was Zora Bennett. She'd taken back her maiden name, and she was brilliant in her own right. And Miles? He disappeared for a while. Not literally, but he stepped back from public life, stopped attending galas and charity functions, stopped posting on LinkedIn about leadership and innovation, just went quiet. And people wondered, speculated, but didn't get answers, because some transformations require silence. 3 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Zora was walking through Centennial Park. Just walking, no destination, no agenda. The magnolias were blooming, those same magnolias that had perfumed Miles's patio the night he'd called Claire for advice. The air smelled sweet, and possibility felt tangible. She was thinking about the future, about what came next. She'd been offered a VP position at a competitor. Better money, more autonomy, a chance to build something new, and she was considering it, really considering it. That's when she saw him, Miles, sitting on a bench near the lake, watching ducks argue over breadcrumbs some kid had thrown. He looked different, lighter somehow, like he'd put down weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. She almost walked past, almost pretended she hadn't seen him. But something, curiosity maybe, or closure, or just human decency, made her stop. "Hey," she said. He looked up, smiled. Not the CEO smile, the real one. The one from 15 years ago at that charity gala. "Hey yourself," he replied. "Want to sit?" She did. They sat there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the ducks and the families and the joggers passing by. Finally, Miles spoke. "I heard about the VP offer. Congratulations. You should take it." Zora glanced at him. "You think so?" He nodded. "Absolutely. You're too talented to stay somewhere that knows you as my ex-wife. instead of Zora Bennett, genius strategist and problem solver. She smiled despite herself. "How are you?" she asked. "Really? How are you?" Miles considered the question. "Honestly, I'm figuring it out. I started seeing a therapist, joined a woodworking class if you can believe that. I'm learning how to be a person instead of a position. It's harder than running a company, turns out." Zora laughed. "I bet." They sat there a while longer, and Zora realized something profound. She didn't hate him, didn't resent him, didn't even regret him. He'd been a chapter in her story, an important one, but not the only one, and certainly not the last one. "I'm sorry," Miles said suddenly, "for everything, for turning our marriage into a business deal, for that stupid declaration in the boardroom, for not seeing you, really seeing you, until it was too late." Zora looked at him. "I know you are," she said gently, "and I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." He nodded, swallowed hard. "Thank you." They sat for a few more minutes. Then Zora stood. "I should go, but Miles, I'm glad you're finding yourself. Really, you deserve that." He stood too. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two people who'd shared 7 years of their lives and were now moving in different directions. "You too, Z," he said softly. "Go build something amazing, something that's all yours." And with that, Zora walked away, not running, not fleeing, just walking, one foot in front of the other, into a future that was hers, and hers alone. So here's where we land. 3 months after that boardroom declaration that changed everything, Zora took the VP position, moved into a new apartment with a view of the river, started dating again, casually, nothing serious, just remembering what it felt like to be seen as a woman instead of a wife. She reconnected with old friends, took up painting, laughed more, and every morning when she woke up, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, free. Miles sold his stake in Harmon Tech, not all of it, but enough to step back completely. He bought a cabin outside the city, spent his days working with his hands instead of spreadsheets, built furniture, hiked, read books he'd been meaning to read for decades, and slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice, he became someone he actually liked. Someone who didn't need power to feel valuable. Someone who could sit with himself and not feel the need to conquer anything. They didn't become friends, didn't meet for coffee or exchange holiday cards. Some separations require distance to heal properly, but they didn't become enemies either. They became something else. Two people who'd loved each other deeply, hurt each other deeply, and walked away with wisdom they couldn't have gained any other way. And that's the thing about endings. They're not always neat, not always satisfying in the way we expect, but sometimes the most honest endings are the ones where both people simply move on, where the love doesn't turn to hate, where the hurt doesn't turn to bitterness, where two people realize that caring about someone doesn't mean you have to be with them, that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the freedom to find out who they are without you. So, what's the moral here? What's the lesson in all this mess? Maybe it's that power without respect is just control, that love without freedom is just possession, that knowing when to hold on is important, but knowing when to let go is essential. Or maybe the lesson is simpler. You can't build a life with someone else until you know who you are by yourself. And sometimes discovering that costs you everything you thought you wanted. Zora stands on her balcony now, evening settling over Nashville, and she thinks about that morning in the kitchen when she asked Miles to sign the papers. How simple it seemed then, how complicated it became, how necessary it was. She doesn't regret the marriage, doesn't regret the divorce, doesn't regret any of it, because every moment, the beautiful ones and the brutal ones, led her here, to this balcony, this freedom, this version of herself that chose dignity over desperation. And Miles, in his cabin workshop, sanding down a piece of cherry wood. That will become a bookshelf, thinks about that boardroom declaration, how desperately he'd wanted to matter to her, how spectacularly he'd failed, how much he'd learned from that failure. He doesn't regret it either, Not anymore. Because sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what actually matters. And what matters, he's learned, isn't what you can control. It's what you can release. 2 people, 2 journeys. One story about what happens when pride meets love and someone has to choose which matters more. They both chose differently than anyone expected. Zora chose herself. Miles chose to let her. And in that choosing, they both won something more valuable than marriage: self-respect. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about this, maybe even comment below, and let me know your answer. Have you ever had to choose between holding on and letting go? Between loving someone and loving yourself? And when you made that choice, did you regret it? Or did you discover, like Zora and Miles, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set someone free, even if that someone is yourself? Think about the people in your life right now, the relationships you're in, the ones you're holding on to. Are you holding on because it's right, or because you're afraid of what happens if you let go? Are you choosing connection or control, love or possession? And here's the harder question. If someone asked you for freedom tomorrow, if they said, like Zora did, "I need you to let me go," would you have the strength Miles eventually found? Would you sign those papers? Would you respect that choice, even if it broke your heart? Because here's what this story is really about. It's about understanding that no one belongs to you. Not your spouse, not your partner, not your children, not your friends. People are not possessions. And the moment you start treating them like assets to be managed instead of humans to be honored, you've already lost them. The only question is how long it takes you to realize it. Zora realized it when Miles made that declaration. Miles realized it when she walked away, despite his vulnerability. And now I'm asking you to realize it before it costs you someone you love. Because unlike them, you still have time. You can still choose differently. You can still honor the people in your life by giving them what Zora asked for and what Miles eventually gave: respect, freedom, the dignity of their own choices. So do me a favor. After you watch this video, don't just scroll to the next one. Take a minute. Think about your relationships, your marriage, your partnerships, and ask yourself honestly, am I holding on or am I helping grow? Am I loving or am I controlling? Am I Miles at the beginning of this story or Miles at the end? And if you're the beginning Miles, the one who confuses providing with possessing, what are you going to do about it today, right now, before it's too late? Drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Have you been Zora? Have you been Miles? Have you had to choose between your dignity and someone else's ego? Between your freedom and someone else's fear? I want to hear from you. And if this story resonated, if it made you think or feel or recognize something in yourself you'd been avoiding, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because these aren't just stories, they're mirrors. And sometimes we need to see ourselves reflected back to understand what we've become and, more importantly, what we can still choose to be. Remember, true love isn't measured by how tightly you hold on. It's measured by how gracefully you let go. And the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who break, learn, and choose themselves anyway. Just like Zora, just like Miles, just like you can, starting today. Now go, choose yourself, choose dignity, choose freedom, and watch how everything else falls into place.